Hey guys, Loam02. Currently going to be doing a deck tech on this very interesting Canadian Highlander deck that you have in front of you, which is Aggro Loam. So, if you're not interested in deck techs or theory of play, which this is, I think, a fairly diverse, not truly sophisticated, but like it's got a lot going on in it. For an aggressive deck especially. You may want to listen through it. If you don't, then please go down to the comments section. Down there, they'll be tagged all the matchups that I'll be showcasing that I've played with this deck to this point. This deck's still one that's in tuning, and I'll kind of go through some of the, most of my decks are that I showcase here. So, if you see some cards that are questionable, definitely ask a question on it, and I'll try to highlight the cards that I think are probably the most flexible right now, and some of the things that I'm thinking of as far as, like, flex spot considerations that are in the deck. Okay, so Canadian Highlander, if you're unfamiliar with the format, you probably haven't watched my channel before, but if you're watching it, that's awesome, and I'm glad of it. So Canadian Highlander is a 100-card singleton format, not unlike EDH, but vastly different in how it plays from EDH. It's a 20 life point format that involves no ban. There's no ban cards in the format, with the exception of all manual dexterity cards, and some weird old cards like anti-cards and like Scheherazade are banned. But other than that, everything is legal. That said, there's a points list that governs what cards you can play in a deck. So for this deck, I am playing Mox Ruby, Mox Emerald, Strip Mine, and Umezawa's Shite as my points. So Moxes are 3 points each, the Strip Mine is 2, and then the Umezawa's Shite is 2. Okay, so this is a 4-color aggressive deck. So there's a lot of different builds of 4-color aggressive, 4-color mid-range decks. 4-color Blood is kind of the more, I think, archetypical deck that you see between a lot of the different Highlander formats, to range from Australian Highlander to German Highlander, and even Canadian Highlander. A lot of those builds have gotten more aggressive, especially in Canadian Highlander, as the format's sped up, and combo has become a little more resilient and a little more deep in the quality of its cards to get after its combination, whether it be Storm, Time Vault, etc. A lot of it's sped up, so if you're not a deeply interactive deck, you want to go quicker. So your deck needs to get cheaper and or more interactive, one or the other. What this deck's seeking to do is kind of cement some of the advantages that the most aggressive builds of 4-color Blood can have. This deck tops out at 3, converted mana cost to 3. So it has kind of like the range of flexible cards to give it some matchup neutrality, but make it just a little bit quicker. And then also add on top of that a recursion engine, which in this case is Life from the Loam. And Strip Mine, Wasteland, any of these new lands that have been printed in Modern Masters, all of the not Pain lands, the Horizon lands, Canopy lands, whatever you want to call them, the ones that produce manas of the colors that are in this deck, and also can sacrifice to draw cards. So your land cards can transmute into actual cards, ideally, as the game goes on. It's not a fast bond deck, so it's not seeking to actually win through some sort of fast bond lock with Life from the Loam and like Raminap Excavator or Crucible of Worlds. Those are powerful combos, but I think it's a separate deck. I think it's a different deck than this one. The reason I opted to try to put Loam in this is, one, I heard someone had recently won like a contest up in I think a competition between friends up in Victoria with a deck called 4-color Loam, and I was like, man, like I haven't seen their list for starters, but I was like, man, that sounds awesome. Like that deck just sounds like it's a riot to play. And I started thinking through my head. I'm like, all right, well, what did they build? How did they build it? What did it look like? Did they go bigger, have tireless trackers and stuff like that, or did they go kind of low to the ground and essentially buff up a 4-color Blood or a 4-color aggressive deck with a Loam package and a few incidental threats that could be played in a non-Loam deck, but are better because of Loam being in your deck. So that's the route I kind of took when I was building, because I was like, man, it sounds sweet. I kind of want to build something along those lines. And this is what I ended up coming up with. So this is a 4-color deck. It is playing the most relevant fast lands. So the lands Blackcleave Cliffs, Copperline Gorge, and I believe that is it. I'm not playing the white-green one, and I think the white-green one and the white-black one are not in here. I'm only playing the two most relevant. It's generally a base Jund deck. White is the smallest splash inside of the deck. All the dual lands that are relevant, so you have all of them in here. All of the fetch lands that are relevant, which is a lot of them. I believe we're missing a couple blue ones. This may actually be all the fetch lands, I don't know. You'll notice I'm not playing any basic lands. That was a conscientious decision. I mean, if I were to play one, I have to look at this again. Let's take a look at this real fast and look at the analysis on this deck if Moto doesn't freeze up. Alright, yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry, 17 and the red sources. Maybe I should be playing the copper line. No, actually, the reason I made that decision is because I have the canopy horizon, which gives me the white green. So black is actually the lowest splash right now. I'm not running any basics because the deck is so diverse in its mana requirements that the basic, despite it kind of playing around Assassin's Trophy and Path to Exile, just didn't seem worth it. If I were to do it, I mean, I would run a green source because green is the predominant base color of the deck. Really like a Selesnya deck. So as you go into the fetch lands are the fetch lands. There's no prismatic vista here. As you go to the utility lands, you have, let me pull this up. I don't know if we need it for like the mana base specifically, but oh my goodness. Moto, why? Why? You can tell I haven't recorded in a while, and Moto is going slow. May I change the size of this? No? Alright, there we go. You have Caracas in here. Alright. You have Caracas in here, which just return target legendary creature to its owner's hand. Very powerful card. Can just win games. If you put a 3-mana blocker away, like, Brimaz or like Thalia Heretic Cathar, the game probably ends, especially if you're putting your opponent under any sort of pressure. Just one bounce spell, basically can render their whole plan moot. All of these dual lands that can sacrifice for drawing a card, you don't really care about the damage in this deck. Do you lose to price and progress? Yeah, probably, but you don't need a lot of lands to make this deck run either. I mean, this deck can run on 3 lands pretty effectively, so you don't per se need it. And then Strip Mine and Wasteland. So let's go over the Loam package and kind of what makes this deck distinguishable. I'm going to highlight this pile right here. This is the pile that works with Loam. So I do have Entomb in this deck. One of the cards that I kind of added, not as an afterthought, but kind of as something to supplement the Entomb plan is that, I may want to get a creature. So I put Unearth in the deck as well because I am running Entomb. It gives me more ounce to making Entomb useful. Entomb is good for finding life in the Loam, right? And or a creature that I want to unearth. All of my creatures are unearthable in this deck. You can also use Entomb if you already have Loam to find, Wasteland, Strip Mine, Caracas, or any mana you may need to cast your spells. You can also use it as an instant speed way to pump up Elvish Reclaimer. There's a lot of cool things, or Knight of the Reliquary as well. Like, there's a couple cool things that Entomb can do, but in general, it's going to be finding Loam, or it's going to be finding a threat to get back with Unearth, or it's going to be an instant speed way of making Elvish Reclaimer 3/4 to kind of blow someone out in combat. Whatever. But basically, finds creatures, you can unearth them. If it doesn't find creatures to unearth them, it finds Loam. And if it doesn't find Loam because you already have Loam, it finds the pertinent land that you want to combine off with Loam. I just think Entomb at 1 mana is such a powerful effect, a powerful tutor effect, that it's kind of tough not to consider. And I don't see it played that often. And I think the card is just really powerful for what it does. And it can set up a lot of good broken card advantage engines with Loam. So I think the card is quite good. Crop Rotation, just one of the more powerful tutors, likely to get pointed at some point in time. At which point, if I had to take a set of points out of this deck, it would definitely be Umezawa's Shit. I do like Umezawa's Shit in the deck, but if Crop Rotation were a point, I would probably cut Shit and figure out what I do with the last point. I don't know right now. Reclaimer. This card, one is 1 mana. It can tutor for any land, so it can find me some of my utility lands if I need to draw in the late game. If I'm like kind of petering out and need to find some gas, I can do that. It can find Wasteland or Strip Mine to kind of bide some time. It can find Caracas to bide some time as well, basically with the game. And it's also a 3/4 after you get a couple lands in the bin. And it's not hard to get a lot of lands in the bin, especially with this many fetch lands and this many lands that you can cycle off, essentially, for 1 mana. Life in the Loam itself, Weathered Wayfarer. So this is a 30-land deck. It is running Mox Ruby, Mox Emerald, Mox Diamond, as well as Chrome Mox to power on its threats rapidly. So oftentimes it's not going to be up on lands. And you can also do fetch tricks with like this Weathered Wayfarer. You fetch one of your lands before you find Weathered Wayfarer in response to the trigger on the stack. Find the next land after your fetch resolves afterwards. Weathered Wayfarer is very powerful as well. It's not going to get bigger in attack, but it's a 2/1 at 1 mana in white. The card's just great. I think it's oftentimes underrated. Knight of the Reliquary, this card just gets massive and can be a massive beating, especially if you're in like a Loam style deck, and it also just finds whatever land you might need. Unearth, again, it kind of combines out well with Entomb, and if you're Loaming and you see a relevant card that you may want, you can unearth it to get it back. Grim Lavamancer, Loam fuels Grim Lavamancer, especially all these fetch lands that we have in this build. Grim Lavamancer is going to be able to keep going for a very long while. Deathrite Shaman, same thing. Someone was mentioning that like it may be awkward with Loam to have to sack or to exile your own lands to make mana. Not really. You only have to do it like once or twice, and then most of the time, like if you do it once or twice on the first or couple early turns, then you're going to start using it to actually kill your opponent because you'll be at enough mana. So I don't find that's exceedingly relevant. The only ones you really don't want to exile are like Wasteland, Strip Mine, Karakas. The rest of them, I mean, like these are pretty expendable, and your fetches are generally fairly expendable as well. Scrapheap Scrounger. I considered running Bloodghast in this build, but Bloodghast is double black, and I kind of found that like black was my lightest splash in the deck. And while I could produce one pretty reliably, I felt like two was a stretch for the build. So if it ever got trapped in my hand, I didn't want to have it in my hand and not be able to play it. So Scrapheap was the way I went. I didn't go with Bloodghast, but it's an option you could try out in the deck if you want to go more black heavy. Wrenn and 6. This is another big inspiration for this deck. It was really this card, the Elvish Reclaimer, and then this cycle of lands right here that was like, man, I should try to build something like this because Wrenn and 6 is just broken. I mean, like you play this on turn 2 and it kills a mana dork. Or, you can get the highest upside is like you just strip lock someone out and they don't play any lands. You play like a 3/3 Wild Mikado and just beat them to death. But this card just does a lot. I've never ultimated it in this deck, but I have ultimated this card before, and that's stupid too. Card's just very good, and in general, I think tends to work kind of with the strategy. It's either removal or it's recursion. It's card advantage, so 2 mana 2-for-1s tend to be really good. Grimflayer gets huge relatively fast, especially if you're loaming. Just gets fast in general in this deck. This deck has a pretty wide spread of different types of cards. Tarmogoyf, yep, just huge. Been getting played since like 2000 and something, 2007. I don't whatever this thing was printed. This actually may have been 2005. I can't remember when Goyf was printed. It was highly underrated when it was printed, but it's been played in Highlander ever since Highlander was the thing. Scavenging Ooze. Card can also get big if you're loaming. You put some creatures in there, some creatures you may not want back or may not care about. Just loam them, or just not loam them. Just eat them up with ooze, and it'll get bigger. So it's kind of the loam package. It's 14 cards. I mean, and you could say like some of these lands over here are periphery components to the loam package, but I think it's enough synergy that like you can rationalize loam. Now, you're not always going to want to take the loam route. Like we're an aggressive deck, and we'll kind of cover our threats here in a bit. And if you don't want to go the loam route, you definitely don't have to with the deck. There's very few cards that are completely dead in this pile, in and of themselves, without loam. Like, most of these cards are still just fine on their own, but they get better with Life in the Loam. A few of them are a little more dubious. Like, Entomb, if you don't have Unearth or you don't have, like, Life in the Loam, like, you probably don't want Entomb, but Entomb is a free way to find Life in the Loam, and then maybe you can put it to good use. So it probably is the most dubious card in this pile, just from a building perspective. You could replace it with an aggressive drop, but then like it kind of becomes like, why are you playing Life in the Loam? Like Entomb really helps set this up, and I think it makes the package altogether tighter. So it's a judgment call if you want to run Entomb or not. So I did build 2 copies of this deck. One of them is about 8 to 9 cards different, and it does not run Life in the Loam and Entomb, and some of the package in the Loam package here. And it's really just a good 4-color blood aggressive deck, and it runs fine. It's not the most creative of decks, but it runs just fine. But I ended up liking this version a little bit better because it kind of had different matchup percentages. It's able to range up a lot better. It plays more like a mid-range deck than 4-color blood. The lowest to the ground versions of 4-color blood do. Now, like the old school 4-color blood is a quintessential mid-range deck. A lot of the builds that are more aggressive, like 4C aggro, don't play as mid-rangey a game plan. They're more just trying to beat your face in. Whereas this deck, I felt like at a very low converted mana cost, was able to take some more controlling mid-rangey lines against certain decks. It was able to kind of attrit out, control builds, but still have that good low-to-the-ground aggressive game plan to actually win a lot of games as well. Okay, so anyways, let's jump off of the actual Loam package. I'm going to go into this pile first. So I oftentimes say that, like, I think it's very bad to have, like, tutors inside aggressive strategies. And I ended up going against my own words of advice or my own beliefs in the game, and I'm actually playing Eldamri's Call and Tainted Pact. One, these cards are very powerful. 2, this deck has a wide range of different card options in it because, like I was saying, it kind of plays more like low-end mid-range, or I want it to play more like low-end mid-range. So it doesn't per se have like the best aggressive cards, but it has like some of the better cards at doing all sorts of different things. So like Kambal is not like an optimized aggressive threat, but he just showstops certain decks. Knight of the Autumn just does a lot. Thalia, I think this probably is a top-end aggro threat. Even Mind Sensor does a lot. This is kind of like my hate package here, like my hate cards. Like I kind of have like a mini death and taxes, like a mini taxes list here, kind of going. Thalia, Harsh Mentor for like time vaults, fetch lands, other Loam decks. Eidolon, Storm, Voice of Resurgence, Control. Casali just kills something. Dryad Militant just houses Storm. You also have like the Mother of Runes and the Giver of Runes if you want to if you're playing a fair game plan. You also have like Umezawa's Shit, which is just very, very powerful. You have Skull Clamp, which is very powerful. You have Hand Attack if you need to get something out of your opponent's hand. I have gone for Fire Covenant and Zealous Persecution with this card. This card right here, Tainted Pact, specifically because Fire Covenant is a one-sided Wrath of God, which is very powerful. I mean, you may lose like 90% of your life, but that's alright, generally. Eldamri's Call just finds whatever you need. So one of the things with the Loam package that I ended up finding is that I could generally make my land drops pretty assuredly, even on 30 lands. So I found that Eldamri's Call wasn't per se horrible. It would be the last card I cast, but it would be like a game ender. So I'd cast it and then also cast the threat that I got with it immediately following after I had traded my opponent out of resources and had them under a pretty significant clock. And Loam allows you to do that even if you're staying aggressive. Same thing with Tainted Pact, except it just gets anything. There are no duplicate cards, obviously, in the list, so Tainted Pact gets you whatever you want. You may lose something else, so it's not a committed way of getting Life in the Loam plus Strip Lock online, but if you just need a specific threat and or answer, this will get it for you. So I did kind of go with my own advice and run these cards. These are not cards I would play per se in 4-color Blood unless I was in a specific meta and I wanted to have hate cards in my deck. But if I was just a pure aggressive deck, I don't think these cards are good. I think in general you'll lose more games playing them. If you're a pure aggro deck, then you will win them. Alright, so the next pile is my removal pile. So Fatal Push, Forked Bolt, Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, which is possibly cuttable, Swords of Plowshares, Path to Exile, Assassin's Trophy, Abrupt Decay. Jermoka's Command is kind of a spicy one. It allows you to deal with enchantments. It also protects your creatures from, Pyroclasm effects, Pyrokinesis, stuff like that, like any mass burn. Cinder Vines, I just like having access to this card. It's, an additional copy of Casali Pride Mage and or Knight of the Autumn when need be, and it also is an attritional means of killing an opponent. It stops certain combinations, from killing you. Storm has a tougher time going off through a Cinder Vine. It's kind of like another copy in a way of Eidolon. Also deals with Time Vault combo, deals with a lot of the artifact-based decks. It's just a very powerful card. Abrade, just very powerful removal, flexible and powerful removal, and definitely worth the 2 CMC casting cost, I believe. Zealous Persecution, this is kind of like another one-sided Wrath, but it also complements the deck's strategy of attacking with its aggressive threats to actually win the game. And then Fire Covenant we talked about. This is kind of one you don't see all that often, but I think it's been talked about as a best card you're not playing several times. This card is a one-sided Wrath, and for an aggressive deck, this is pretty optimal because you don't really care about your life total, and if you can set up a turn where you win by just wiping their board, that is generally great. Skull Clamp, yep, this thing just draws tons of cards. A lot of the threats I've chosen to play in this deck tend to be Forked Bolt and Shockproof, so you have stuff like Curd Ape, Loam Lion, Wild Nacatl, Sky Shroud, Elite, Narnum Renegade. Well, we'll go over a couple more. There's a few that do die to it. You still have it, Stormblood Berserker is also a 3/3. Knight of the Ebon Hand, it takes down a full shock, but if you cast it the same turn that you're doing damage to your opponent, it's going to be a 2/3. Kithian, just his quality is so high, plus he can become indestructible if need be. But there's a lot of cards that kind of get around that type of removal, make it a little more challenging, and also block and attack well, so it kind of gives you some flexibility on playing against other aggressive decks. You can generally block a little better. But at the end of the day, I still think Skull Clamp's worth it. Even if I don't have as many threats that purely sacrifice to it, just equipping it onto something and making it a 3/2 as opposed to a 2/3. If they want to shock it, cool. I'll have more cards, more resources to kind of beat them with. I think that's just fine. Also have Dark Confidant as a draw engine in this deck. This deck caps off at 3 CMC, which is not a lot, and it does not have a lot of 3 CMC cards. And then the Unholy Trinity of Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Duress. I don't know if it's correct to play these cards, but I definitely like having access to them, just because they're kind of they're good, flexible, efficient answers to a lot of different bullshit that could possibly happen when you're playing in the format. And it also gives you a lot of information. I think that information is oftentimes very powerful and allows you to develop your strategy in any given game that you're in. Okie doke. So the threats. And I've already covered some of the threats that kind of cover in the Loam pile, but here are the threats. Curries have 1, shockproof, 2, 2 bodies attacking, menace on this one, wears a jit well, wears a clamp well, is a legend, which kind of stinks. Also kind of plays to your benefit as well with Caracas, because you can balance her and protect her. She's relatively cheap, but basically I look at her as a 3-3, 2 of which the power is actually blockable, but tends to trade pretty well, who is tough to block, and that tends to be pretty good. Loam Lion, not the most impressive of cards, but it's 2-3, and like I was saying, I kind of wanted just cheap threats that protect themselves in a way just due to their size. I didn't go with a lot of just thick idiots at the 2 spot. I did put a lot of thick idiots at the 1 spot because I just wanted good aggressive threats I could put down and force my opponent to react to them. And then kind of if I wanted to set up a Loam engine, or if I wanted to develop further, I could develop further. But just to have more efficient threats that just stand alone and are hard to kill. It's a lot harder for Jeskai or Grixis to kill a Loam Lion than it is for them to kill something like Zergo, which I am running a Zergo, but at the same time, I think he's on the upper end of threat. He's on the bottom end of threats in this deck, but still on the upper end of 1 mana threats in red deck wins, mostly because of dash. You have Kithy in here. Can be made indestructible. Can become a very cheap planeswalker that's very effective at killing folks. Card just of great quality. Just a very high quality aggressive drop. Knight of the Ebon Legion. So I was actually dubious of this card in Suicide Black, but I was really impressed by how it played. The pump effect is no joke on this card. If you just need a mana sink, it can get big fast. In aggressive decks like this, it's not hard to do 4 damage to either yourself or your opponent. I actually just recently played a game where I just took 4 damage off of tapping a Nurturing Peatland, Silent Clearing, to cast this thing, fetch with a fetch land, taking 1, and then found a shock land to take 4 damage on my own turn. Because this thing says if a player lost 4 or more life this turn, it still got the +1/+1 counter, even though it was me as a player losing that life, and it put it to a 2-3, which I don't know how relevant it was in the game, but it allowed me to push more damage and attack through a lot more creatures. This card's just really good. I was really impressed with the quality of this thing. You'll see I'm not playing a lot of black threats in this, black early drop threats in this deck, because I think in general white, red, and green tend to just have better 1-drop threats. But this one's of good enough quality that I think it is definitely worth the include in the deck. Outside of that, most of my 1 mana black cards are discard, kill spells, or unearth. It's kind of where it's at right now. Going down, you have Stormblood Berserker, which is, again, it's a 3-3 for 2, which is good. It's hard to block, and it's pretty easy to set up Bloodthirst in the deck. Goblin Guide, well, it's just a haste threat. It's a shock if need be. It's also got 2 toughness, which is a lot better than 1. It means it's not going to get fork bolted, and you're not going to get 2. Well, it can get fork bolted, but it's not going to get fork bolted for value. Curd Ape, 2-3 again, basically the OG Loam Lion. Experiment 1, oftentimes going to be a 3-3 in the deck, because you'll play this out first, and then, sequence, Hex Drinker into Curd Ape, and then it's just huge. It's a 3-3. Narnum Renegade, another 2-3, not very hard with 10 fetch lands to set up Revolt in this deck. I think I just mentioned Hex Drinker. If you need mana sink, you have a bunch of them in the 1 spot. You have Knight of the Ebon Legion, which is a good one to sink mana into. You've got the Hex Drinker, which is great. I mean, once this thing gets to 3, protection from instants, you're pretty set. Skyshroud Elite, there's not a lot of decks that don't play any non-basic lands, so oftentimes it's going to be a 2-3. I haven't had a match yet where if I had drawn it, which I don't believe I've drawn this card yet, it would not have been a 2-3. And a 2-3 for 1 is just a good rate. Wild Nacatl, I believe one of the few 1-mana 3-3s, basically, and it will often be in this deck. Zergo, 2-2 for 1. But typically speaking, you're going to dash this guy in. I found I dash this guy in more often than not. 1, it's good surprise damage. 2, protects you from getting blown out by many for 1 removal spells like Toxic Deluge. And oftentimes, despite being a 30-land deck, because you're a Loam deck, you'll have plenty of mana to do this. You don't have to worry about it being in your hand. And if they want to spend an Inquisition or a Thoughtseize, it's fine, I think. Greenwell Liberator, again, Revolt card, 4-3, just a big body for 2 mana. Putrid Leech, 4-4 for 2, big body. Scab Gland Mauler, not as high on this card, but this card's still big. I mean, it's a 3-3 Trampler, essentially for 2 mana, which is still pretty strong. Fleecemane, a 3-3, with some upside. It can become a 4-4 and Hexproof for the commitment of 5 mana, which is a lot, but it's also just a free mana sink on a Watch Wolf, basically. Smuggler's Copter, filters your draw in an aggressive deck, puts lands in the bin for you to get back. You can unearth creatures if you put them in the bin. in. Like, there's just a lot of cool things you can do with the yard in this deck. It also makes Lavamancer fuel, all the stuff we talked about in the Loam pile. Umezawa was shit. So when I built this list, initially when I built it just as a 4-color aggressive deck, it was a 3 Mox spread deck, and I believe it played not Thoughtseize, I'm sorry, Mind Twist, maybe? I can't remember. It may have had Mind Twist. It may not have actually had Mind Twist. It may have just been 9-pointer. But anyways, because I cut one of the Moxen out of the list and ended up adding in the Strip Mine, I ended up going with Umezawa's shit for the list. I do not have a good way of tutoring this card outside of just using the Tainted Pact. It is a little bit slower, but it also shores up your mid-range matchups quite a bit because this card is just very difficult to beat. If mid-range can't answer this thing right away, it's going to mean that like your Harsh Mentors and your Dryad Militants scale up really well against your opponent. In this next pile here, you can have my hate cards. I think I talked most of these. Yeah, I talked most of these. So anyways, guys, that is the list. It's got a lot of different kind of themes, sub-themes going on, and different stuff going on. What I like to think of this deck as is kind of more of like a low-curve mid-range deck, because it can play kind of 2 separate games. It can play like a value-oriented, tempo plan, or it can play an aggressive game plan. It has a lot of flexibility. I think this package right here that we have, that we call the Loam package, is tight enough. It consists of enough like cards that are independently good on their own that we really don't feel the effects of having Life from the Loam and Entomb in our deck. Too highly in the games where we don't want to have those cards. We're still able to kind of be aggressive. And in the games that we do want access to that, we have a lot of ways to access it, and it doesn't require a massive dumped cost into the deck build, such that the deck loses too much focus on its primary game plan, which is attacking people to death with creatures. So anyways, guys, that is the deck build. I'm going to go ahead and pause it right now, and we will jump into some gameplay with Aggro Loam. Alright, folks, we are back for the first game with Aggro Loam here. Nope, not Aggro Loam at all. Quick pause, guys. Different deck. Alright, guys, back. So this is my first game against Amius Malin. This hand is, it's pretty medium. It's not the worst, not the best. It's got all of its colors of mana, and it's got 2 threats and an Unearth. Get Inquisition here. Opponent ends up taking the Unearth. I think in retrospect, this is my first time playing this deck. I probably could have mulliganed a little more aggressively, especially with the London mulligan rule. Old habits may die hard. Attack in, get in for 3, down to 16. And see a Marine come down. So I'm playing against Pod, probably Bug Pod, but maybe just Golgari Pod. I go ahead and sack here, don't attack. I probably should have forced damage here. The only problem I had with forcing damage is I may want to remove on their EOT, which I end up doing here. The Zergo doesn't attack through very well. So I am going to go ahead and just cast down Zergo with haste, attack with both. This will force a Mother of Runes tap here, which I'm going to oblige him because I want to safeguard my threat. Play out my land, fetch to try to thin my deck a bit, and also to get this Scabcallan Mauler down. I don't think the Blood Crypt's going to be that relevant, and right now I feel like I'm probably not winning this game. Especially with Phyrexian Tower coming down and Glen Elandra, bringing back the Fyndhorn Elves that my opponent just sacrificed. Find another fetch land here. Go ahead and get in there with the Scrap Heap Scrounger to eat the first half of Glen Elandra. Right now I'm trying to do some showmanship and see if I can get my opponent not to attack by leaving the Scabcallan Mauler back. I could have made a more aggressive attack with it and actually protected it with Mother of Runes. They get their Icewing Coatl back, Ice Fang Coatl back. I go ahead and attack here, seeing what I can get. This is protected from green, I want to say. I'm going to let them untap. The Mother of Runes is going to be able to protect the Glen Elandra, but I'll be able to trample over. They attack in. Don't kill the Mother of Runes there with Yawgmoth, which to me seems very aggressive. It seems, I'm sorry, not aggressive enough. I think they wanted to use Yawgmoth just to kill off Mother of Runes when she was tapped. I'm pretty much in a forced position where I have to do this, though, I think. And now I hit Tainted Pact, which is actually really nice. Like I was saying, one of the things this deck, can do, even though I did not have Loam this game, is have a significant number of lands. So even though it's an aggressive deck, I find the Tainted Pact is often going to be good. And what I'm hoping to do here is try to set up a situation where I can use Tainted Pact to find Fire Covenant. The biggest issue is going to be, they have a Glen Elandra in play, so I have to hope they screw up. My opponent actually does screw up here, so I should just be utterly dead here. But they tap both their lands, so I go for Tainted Pact for the Fire Covenant. And eventually I find it. I get rid of a lot of cool stuff. Obviously, this is not a hard lock. They have Time Walk already stacked up, and they're going to draw a bunch of cards off Yawgmoth when I go to do this, and probably hit a creature they can pod into something to win with. More than likely, they'll be able to pod into a win here. But I go for a Fire Covenant and knock them down to well, they knock themselves down to 8, but kill all of their creatures, basically. Now, if they left open one of the blue mana, then they could have used Glenalandra here. I think they probably figured I could not react in time. Because Yawgmoth's only himself, I am able to save the Mother of Runes here. They play a threat, fetch, I believe, play out a Time Walk, Rex Sage, sack their thing, get back Archaeomancer to get Time Walk back, and that's game over. I go ahead and concede it here. Yep, I'm very, very dead. So anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back for game number 2 against Bug Walk Pods, or Pod Walk, whatever you want to call it. Alrighty, guys, back. So now I know I'm playing against, I'm going to probably rely more on the Loam plan here. I'm going to try to get down a good aggressive base and then go into a Loam plan. This hand I think is pretty good because it's going to be able to kill their first mana dork, which they'll likely have, and then wasteland them. I'm hoping to draw into something gas after I do this, but there we go. There's some gas. This deck runs a lot of it. Go ahead and hit them for 2, and they have that land, which is not good. I'm happy to see a Fire Covenant. It means I'll be able to blow out their board if and when they develop. They play on a Death right here. I could just kill that thing right away, but I want to see what I draw first to see if it makes sense to. I just go ahead and get rid of all of that stuff, I believe. Yeah, got rid of all of it. So I shuffle here, play out the Skyshroud Elite. Represent Lightning Helix. They Intuition here. I don't have Lightning Helix, obviously. I give them back a Regrowth, which to me means they probably have the Time Walk in hand. I go ahead and Fatal Push their Deathrite Shaman. They make a green. I slap them for a lot of damage. I believe I get rid of everything. I get rid of all of it. None of it was that relevant. They duress, get rid of my Fire Covenant here. Down to 4 cards, had not played a land last turn, but did Time Walk. Regrowth, Time Walk into nothing. So, go ahead and win the game here. They're at 1 life, so they have to present a significant clock, and it's not likely they're going to be able to combo out on only 4 mana with nothing on the board and only 4 cards in hand. So, we end up getting there against them. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for game number 3. Alright, guys, back. First hand, we only had 1 land. Go ahead and keep this one. I didn't see what I got rid of there. They play out an Elves, which is cool. I go ahead and duress them, get rid of a Liliana of the Veil, or Liliana of the Last Hope, which would have been a problem. The other hand is kind of just like more redraws. So they play out Coiling Oracle, find the Tropical Island. I just go ahead and get out the Dryad Militant and say go. They play out a Baleful Strix and play out a Fauna Shaman. They go to attack with everything they can attack this turn, which makes sense. The Dryad Militant's going to be actually bad for their deck because it eats up their Time Walk, and they're a deck that wants to recurse Time Walk over and over and over again. I just go ahead and get down the Goyf right now. It's a 3-4, which is a decent size, and I have a Braid to deal with the Baleful Strix so I can start passing damage through. They stay back with all. Draw a Swords to Plowshares. I just go ahead and Braid right now because I want to start putting them under pressure. Attack with the Goyf, leaving up Swords to Plowshares in case they get like something like a Vanifar or something like that I can kill. If they played a pod here, I may actually just blow up the Coiling Oracle too, just to give them less options or make their chain a little bit longer. Play out my Cat. Now if I draw a land, the Cat's going to get huge. I still have Plow Up on their turn, and it's looking pretty good for me. They've flooded out pretty horribly this game, but that's one of the downsides to playing more mid-range strategies. You run more lands in general. I attack with all here because I want to get the Green Walled Liberator down, or Green Wheel Liberator down. This does leave me a little more open to Time Walk shenanigans, but they haven't done anything, and they've been pretty much drawing lands, so I figured this puts them under the most duress and still leaves up Swords to Plowshares. I suppose they could, Regrowth, Time Walk, and take multiple turns and maybe draw into a win. So maybe it was more wise to leave back the Dryad Militant, but I figured once I cleared the board off of this thing, it was going to open up my clock significantly. I suppose either way, it's probably dead next turn. even with Swords to Plowshares. But, obviously, it did end up getting the job done. I don't know if it was correct to attack with the Dryad Militant there, though. I just wanted to get out the Green Wheel Liberator, and maybe it'd have been more correct to have not. No, it puts him on an extra turn, because we don't push through the 8 damage that we push through this turn. We basically would end up pushing through 3, and they'd be up 5, and then they wouldn't be quite dead on the following turn. So I think I end up liking this line. I could have also plowed the Coiling Oracle, but I think Plow is actually a more relevant card in like 90% of what they could have in their hand or what they could draw off the top of their deck, outside of like the Mad Nut Draw, which is like Time Walk into 2-drop into Pod into Time Walk win would probably be like the worst for me. But that's 3 draw steps in a row, as opposed to assuming that over their next 2 draw steps, which I'd be giving them a third if I didn't attack with Dryad Militant, they would draw into, a creature, which is a lot more likely than, drawing nut in a row. So I think I like the Dryad Militant attack there. It is a little more questionable, though, because Dryad Militant is very important to getting rid of their Time Walk if they indeed go that route. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back for the next game in this series of match sets with Aggro Loam. Alrighty, guys. Back playing its Jackie the Puppet here. This hand's fine. It's got a little bit going on. Got a little bit of everything going on. I just go ahead and Inquisition them here because I'm going to play Wrenn and 6 on the following turn. I get rid of the 3-1 because it pressures Wrenn and 6 the most. And even Mindset, well, it seems like on its surface to be really bad for me. Doesn't really matter all that much because it's going to fog one use of a fetch land. But Wrenn and 6 is going to deal with it on the following turn. They play on a tapped land. I fetch, finding a Savannah. Get back my land. Play out my Weathered Wayfarer and play out my Deathrite Shaman. Their hand includes Notion Thief and Jace the Mind Sculptor that we know of. They evidently drew into a Teferi. They bounced my Deathrite Shaman with their Teferi, which means that I have a lethal line on their Teferi. I just use Wrenn and 6 to do it. End up replaying this out. Now, if they play a land on their turn... Actually, no, correction, I can't do that. I was going to say I can actually use the Weather Wayfarer to find a land on their turn. So they play on a Jace the Mind Sculptor. Look. Go ahead and cycle. I should have definitely not used my Savannah there. I should have waited on that. Draw on a Loam. Right now, what I really need is pressure. I don't need more of the stuff I'm getting. I blow up their white mana source. Get this back. Realistically, if I draw a threat here, I'm probably, in a very good spot to win by just knocking the Jace out. If the Jace dies, they probably lose the game. Unfortunately, it's not the way the game plays out here. They play out a Detention Sphere, get rid of my Wrenn and 6, which is not that bad because I have a Loam to kind of beat that. Then they play a Deathrite Shaman, which is also a very solid find. I don't get that back. I just go ahead and strip mine them again. Unfortunately, they kind of found the answers they needed for the threats that I was presenting, and I didn't really have a good threat, right? I've kind of drawn a little bit too much land or mana, and I drew the Loam. And as you can see, the Loam can be a liability when you want pressure. So it's not all upside. I think there is a cost associated with it, but I do think the flexibility that it offers you is pretty good. And outside of situations like this where we're pretty well set up to win, and if we had just drawn any threat in the deck, which there are significant numbers of them, we probably would have. We kind of got into a spot where we're probably not winning here. I just go ahead and attack the Jace. Act like I have Burn. They don't play out their Notion Thief, or they got rid of their Notion Thief. I don't know. They play out their Even Mind Sensor, which is cool. Now I'd be using the Deathrite Shaman to fog their Deathrite Shaman, essentially. They try to use that to find, or use it to make mana. I just use the same land to make mana. If they have a 5-drop, I really don't want them to cast it. And then they play on a Blast Zone and blow up all of my 1-drops. So, Jace the Mind Sculptor kind of just made everything right here. It's not looking so hot for me. I do go ahead and, I draw into an Abrupt Decay, which is a good find. Find Wrenn and 6, kill their Aven Mind Sensor, play on a fetch land, fetch. But I'm pretty far behind at this point. I have tons of mana, and ostensibly my deck, has, a lot less lands to draw at this point. But it still has a significant number. Zur the Enchanter. So we're definitely losing here. Now, realistically, what are we losing to? We're losing to Jace the Mind Sculptor, but Zur, and not drawing pressure over the first 3 turns. Final Domri's Call. I don't think it's good enough here, though. We're just too far behind. Find an Aven Mind Sensor to stop Zur from doing something relevant. It's probably going to get countered or killed, especially on 5 cards with the Jace having done about 4 turns of work here. But I think Aven Mindcensor makes sense because it means that I don't lose like automatically to the Zur. They take a look, draw. They know that I'm sitting on basically just one Aven Mindcensor. They attack. I go ahead and attempt to cast my Aven Mindcensor in response to their Zur the Enchanter trigger. They cast Swords Plowshares. Yep, kill my threat. Find Rest in Peace, which to me means they're probably playing like a Rip Helm deck of some variety. Draw Dryad Militant, which is pretty embarrassingly bad on turn 10. Go ahead and return the lands that don't exist in my yard anymore. They just counter this, I believe. Memory Lapse to put it back on top. I fetch after the Memory Lapse is resolved to get rid of that card because that card was a really bad draw. Another option I have is to try to use my Ren and 6 to dome the Jace and draw into like a Chain Lightning or a Bolt. You know, that's an option. The Jace has definitely turned this whole game sideways for me. Helm of Obedience, that's Helm Rip, so if you're not familiar with how this combination works, with Rest in Peace in play, all cards that go into your yard are exiled, right? They're exiled instead. Helm of Obedience says, X tap, target opponent puts cards from the top of their library to the graveyard until a creature card or X cards are put in the graveyard that way, whichever comes first. Because the cards are exiled, if you activate this for 1, it'll keep on exiling cards because it doesn't recognize the card going into the yard. It gets exiled right away. And it exiles your whole library, and you end up at 0 cards. It also gets around like the Eldrazi Titans because if those cards go in there, they just get exiled as opposed to actually triggering. Or they trigger, but they're already exiled, so you don't shuffle anything back in. So this is the game right here. We end up losing to the Rip Helm combo and go into a game number 2. All right, guys, back. This hand looks great. It's got good early pressure. It's got interaction. It's got some hate pieces with Aven Mindcensor, but it's got 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop. And one of the cool things about this hand is it can also decently well set itself up to pump the Knight. That's why I don't fetch right away, even though I know my opponent's playing Mindcensor as well. Another option I had here is to actually play out the Sunbaked Canyon, take 1, and try to fetch for a shock next turn to pump the Knight, but I'm going to be doing enough damage on the following turn, I think, regardless, to actually get them. So they go for a Memory Lapse here. I just fire up the Smuggler's Copter to draw back into my Curd Ape. Get rid of the Abrupt Decay because it doesn't look like they're going to have a deeply developed board right now. At least they're going to have to react to my board is my assumption, unless they play like a True Name Nemesis. They play on a Ranger Captain of Eos, which are pretty cool cards. They're on like basically an Esper like mid-range combo deck. They find Mother of Runes, play on a Loam Lion, which I drew for the turn. Tap the Loam Lion to attack with the Smuggler's Copter and Knight of the Ebon Legion. This is a pretty good bluff because you can pump this thing to a 4/5. I don't do that because I want to leave up the Aven Mindcensor, though. They play out Mother of Runes and say go. I'm going to attempt to cast the Aven Mindcensor on EOT here. If Moto catches up. Valley's a pretty bad draw because they have a Caracas. I also do, but my Caracas is not really equal to theirs. I'm going to go ahead and get in with the Mindcensor, the Smuggler's Copter, and the Knight of the Ebon hand. I actually know, never mind, I attack with all because I don't want to be blocked here. Or if I am blocked, I don't really care that much. They play out a Nimble Obstructionist, block the Curd Ape, which is basically them just eating it. I pump my Knight up to a 5/6. They take 7 down to 3, which means they're dead to any bolt. And I have access to Weathered Wayfarer at this point in time. They bounce back my 2-power attacker. I don't have an attack here because of the Mother of Runes, but I am able to set back up the Aven Mindcensor. And the following turn, I'll probably sack the Sunbaked Canyon to go down to 3 lands. Actually, no, correction, I won't because they're at 5 lands now, but I can find Wasteland to get rid of their lifelink land, which means that I'm going to have lethal on the ground after I protect one of my threats. I do go ahead and attack with Knight of the Ebon Legion. If they have like a flash threat, I can get punished here. If they have a removal spell, I can also get punished, but I'm telling them, hey, have it. And they don't, evidently. So when I get protection from white, they're just going to die to this. So anyways, guys, I'm going to go on a quick pause and come back for game number 3 between Esper Midrange and Loam, or Aggro Loam. Alright, guys, back. This hand is great. For this matchup especially. It's just a good hand in general. I've got Nicodle, Curd Ape, and then Ren and 6, which is pretty strong. Just put out the Curd Ape on turn 1 because it's going to automatically be a 2/3 next turn. I don't have to worry about fetching if I don't want to. They're representing some sort of counter magic here, so I'm just going to play out the shock myself with the Overgrown Tomb, get counterspelled here by Miscalc, and say cool, then play out a Wild Nacatl as a 2/2, which will be a 3/3 next turn, and hit them for 2. Play on a top, but don't have a land drop, which is pretty bad for them. There's consideration to leaving open the Aven Mind Sensor here, and I can't remember if I do or not. I think I actually do here, because I already made my land drop for the turn, and Ren 6 doesn't really do much. Yeah, I leave open the Aven Mind Sensor to try to get them. Or at least force them to counter on their turn, which keeps the tempo in my quarter. Yep, fetch, and go ahead and cast out the Aven Mind Sensor. Force them to do Force of Will here, which is great, because it gets rid of another important card, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Good one. Ranger Captain comes down again, I believe finds Mother of Runes again. Strong sequence. End up playing out the Ren 6, get back my land, fetch, cast Abrupt Decay, blowing up the Ranger Captain, swing in for 5, down to 6. Now basically they need a Toxic Deluge, which will put him to 3, which means Zergo plus Experiment 1. Actually, Zergo plus Ren is lethal. I end up killing the Mother of Runes with these Ren 6, and hit them down to -1 with Zergo, plus my other 5 power worth of dudes. So a couple things we've kind of learned so far with the deck. The first hands I kept in each of these games were a little too loose, I think. They didn't have enough of a good aggressive game plan to present pressure, and I find that in the games where I do keep hands on this deck specifically, or this build of this deck specifically, I tend to do better. This deck's not the best at grinding long-term value like a mid-range deck would, but it's good at grinding enough value to enable a bunch of small, aggressive type threats like the ones we've got in play right now to kind of close the game out. So in a way, like you treat like the Loam engine is almost like a tangle wire. Is kind of what I found with the deck. Like almost consider it like a tangle wire, like it's a temporary reprieve from anything your opponent's gonna be able to do, and then like your small incremental threats are able to chip away at them fast enough that they're disrupted well enough with their mana base being eaten apart that they just lose the game to it, to the threats that you have on board. That's kind of what I found. You also want to keep momentum with it. So yeah, yep. Quick pause, guys. We'll be right back for the last game I'll be showcasing with Aggro Loam here. All right, guys, we are back. This hand looks fine. 2 fetches, 2 threats, 2 tutors. Seems decent. Actually, it's a hand of 4 tutors, but alright, so we get to rest. Tainted Pact gets taken off a Scrubland. Hard to tell what that is. Could be Esper, could be Kratz, could be anything. I play out the Experiment 1 here because I think it gives me the best ounce to do the most damage to them. They played out Doom Traveler. Now I know I'm playing against some version of Aristocrats. Play out Grim Lavamancers. I think it's probably going to be the best card against Kratz in my hand. Alright, we get Assassin's Trophy. I'm unable to find a land here because I don't run any lands. I go ahead and play out Deathrite Shaman after unearthing my card. It's back to a 2/2 at this point. And I've got good fuel for my Grim Lavamancer to kill off this nonsense that they've got and kind of just start working them over. I go ahead and blow their thing up. There's plenty of lands in their bin for me to actually play a good game of Magic with. Eldamri's Call here. I just get Thalia. I'm not sure if it's right. I'm not playing like a card like Anafenza to kind of like lock out Aristocrats decks. They play on a Theomancer. I make red mana off one of the lands in their yard and kill their thing. And they're at 1 card. Not looking good for them. Go ahead and make mana, play out the Goblin Guide, cast out the Thalia Heretic Athar, and I believe they go ahead and pack the game in. I don't know if they can seed right here. They may see their draw step, but they're at a pretty low life total. I've got an overwhelming board advantage. It's going to take like a Toxic Deluge or something along those lines to actually get out of this, and they don't apparently have it. So, quick pause, guys. We'll be back for the next game in this match set. All right, guys, back. Hand's fine. It's got a few frailties. Its mana is a little bit awkward, but it's not bad at all. I go ahead and play out the Deathrite Shaman on turn 1 because it's going to give me up to 4 mana on the next turn. They cast out a Freebooter here. I actually take my Ruby. I think Zealous Persecution is going to be better in this matchup, but they take the Ruby, I guess, to take me off of Scab Clan Berserker. I go ahead and make Grimflayer here. I took damage off my Stomping Ground. This actually is a cool synergy. It gives Knight a +1/+1 counter. Putting it to a 2/3. They play out the Fauna Shaman. I go ahead and attack with all. I get rid of everything but Chain Lightning. the land in my yard is just as good, basically, as being on board because it allows me to cast spells, play out the Scab Clan Mauler, leaving up the Zealous Persecution that they know about. They play out a Selfless Spirit. I'm going to EOT this Zealous Persecution for basically as a 1-for-1 removal spell. Because I want to be able to attack them next turn after Chain Lightning their Shwana Shaman. They're again stuck at 2 lands. They go ahead and just pack it in here because, yeah, they're pretty dead. The Deathrite Shaman accounts for 2 damage. They don't have any good blocks, so they're taking... Actually, the Deathrite Shaman can account for 3 damage. It's going to pump the Knight of the Ebon Hand, or Ebon Legion. So Knight of the Ebon Legion gets pumped to a 5... Basically, a 6 power attacker. Plus 3 is 9, plus 2. They're actually in a forced block situation. Never mind. They're in a forced block situation where they have to block the Grimflare on the Kitesail Freebooter. That opens up casting options on the back end of this sequence to get the Eidolon of the Great Revel down if need be. But I probably wouldn't. I'd probably just pump the Knight and put him to 1, which means neither of their lands tap for mana. So, yeah. This is kind of how this matchup ended up working out. They were short on land, so I don't know if this is really indicative of the Aristocrats matchup for this deck. I think Aristocrats probably would have some deck advantage against this deck. The overall card quality in my deck is probably higher, but the card synergy of Kratz is really high, and they can present a lot of blockers. That said, a lot of my stuff will not trade or get eaten by their blockers because they're like, two power things as opposed to like my 3-4 toughness kind of stuff that I have. In general, my stuff blocks and attacks pretty well. That's kind of one of the things that I used as criteria for building the deck. But anyways, guys, that was Aggro Loam. It's kind of an adaptation of just basically a 4-color aggressive deck. I do think it has slightly different matchup percentages due to having access to a grinding tool, like an incremental grinding tool like Loam and the Strip Lock, if that's desired. And like I said, I think you kind of use it almost as like a Tangle Wire-like effect to just buy yourself time so that your much smaller threats that I think are still of high quality can close games out. And, on certain other draws, the deck can just close games quickly. It's a pretty aggressive deck. I think in general it's going to fish out around turn 4 to turn 5. As you can see here, this is a turn 4 kill. Against Disruption, obviously it goes longer. But in general, I think it plays a pretty good game plan. The mana has worked out pretty well up to this point. Yeah, and I think in general it's a pretty cool deck concept. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this build. Again, it was inspired by me hearing about an Aggro Loam deck that had won an event up in Victoria. I have yet to see that list. I don't know if they followed similar principles to what I followed here, or if they went more mid-rangey with like Tireless Trackers and Raminap Excavators, which like the first thing that I thought, and then I was like, no, let's try to get it really low and see how low we can get it. Now, there's a few cards that I'm still on the fence about, for completing the build. A few I would like to include, but I do think on the whole, the deck plays a pretty good game of Magic, functions pretty well, and so far has done decent things. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed the content, and take care now.